Greetings and thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be working on a rear caliper with a manual e-brake from a 2004 RSX. Now, this will actually work for many of Honda and Acura's rear calipers with the manual e-brake, as this design has been used for a little over 3 decades. It's something that they started out with using on one of my beloved Preludes. The first one was in 1988, the first USDM car to get rear discs. And then I think it was the Accord, the CRX, the Integra, and the Civic. And they all ran this manual rear e-brake. They came in different variations of this caliper. We see this one's a 9CLP14S. The earlier ones were the 7CLP13S, that's on the Integra and the CRX. The 9CLP13S was on the Prelude and the Accord. And then this 9CLP14S has been on a lot of the more recent ones, like Civics, ELs, RSX, Prelude, TSX, CSX, and the last one to get this, I believe, was the Acura ILX in 2018. With the manual rear e-brake. So this caliper spans, 3 decades. A good design, a few common issues, which we'll talk on a little bit, but for the most part, that's a little bit of history about the caliper itself. So as you can probably see, this is a full restoration and rebuild that I have done. It's for one of my cars. Probably not the extent that you're going to be going to, but if it is, you might find it interesting. Even if it isn't, we're going to go through in depth as to what needs to be done, basically from getting these parts back from powder to getting it back to a complete caliper. I'm not really going to touch on the disassembly portion because this video is already super long, and if you watch this video, you should be able to disassemble it or reassemble it in your sleep. Maybe in the future I'll make a disassembly video, but for the most part, we're going from powder forwards. So after that, basically my goal is to just produce like an in-depth kind of educational how-to video highlighting some of my tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, as well as some of the hang-ups and things that I see other people struggling with, because I've watched, I watch YouTube too. I've seen some videos and some people who have worked on these. And I just think I could maybe give some people some tricks to make their lives a little easier. So hopefully they help and you find it useful. We're going to be following a factory service manual. I always recommend if you can get your hands on one of these, they really are the best, and they will guide you through anything that you're doing on your car. You don't particularly need the RSX manual if you have any Honda or Acura manual that details the rebuild of one of these calipers. It is basically the exact same process. There's very few things different about them. So we're going to be using the Prelude one because I mostly work on Preludes. And I have the manuals from basically 88 to 2001. I have all of them. So we're going to do that. And while we follow through with this manual, I will drop in some pictures along the way so that you can actually follow me along, follow all the names of the parts, and it should make your lives a lot easier. With that, we'll also be including just a couple of the supplies, which you'll get some pictures of too. So that's just the rebuild kit of all the wear parts, all the seals. And then I buy a lot of Hawk brake pads. Not a plug for them, but they make good pads. This is their high temperature brake lubricant that I use on all the external parts, mostly being the slides. And then you can use it basically anywhere on there, but I use it specifically mostly for the slides. There's lots of controversy about what grease to use, but I also use just like some silicone grease for any of the internal components, the piston seal, as well as the dust boots. And but just get yourself some brake grease and some silicone grease and you'll get your way through it, no problem. After the supplies, a couple of quick tools. I see one of the first hang-ups is a lot of people who try and remove the circlip that holds the retainer and the assembly of the adjusting bolt in with a pair of straight needle nose pliers. Sorry, not needle nose, though they do use them. Straight snap ring pliers. What you really need is a pair of 90-degree 2-inch snap ring pliers. These will make your life a lot easier. Now, there's a lot of people who are using picks and screwdrivers, and they're just jamming them in there and trying to rip it out. I mean, you do you, whatever you have, but ideally you're not going to want to damage any of those internal parts, and you want to control that released pressure. But I mean, you can do it with whatever you have, and we'll talk about that along the way. But if you can prep for this, a pair of 90-degree snap ring pliers would be super helpful. After that, there's another special tool that the manual outlines for compressing that spring that's being held by that circlip. And I have made one that I actually like more than it. So basically what it is a piece of flat stock threaded to a 10M bolt, and then it attaches to a socket that's been sliced. And actually this top piece is the really sweet piece. It's the end pivot bolt off of like an early non-VTEC B series where the rocker sits in. And basically I've just ground it down, fitted it into the end of the socket, buzzed it, and that works perfectly because the 10M bolt fits right in there and it aligns itself. It also gives you a little bit of wiggle, which is perfect. This works so well. If you have time to make one of these, make one of these. Without that top piece, this tends to slide around and slip, which it's still a good option, but it's not perfect. So yeah, that's some supplies, some tools. We talked a little bit about the manual. I'm going to be following that, only deviating when I think I have a better way or a way that will save you some time. I will include some of the pages as pictures so you can follow along and know all the parts that we're working with. So that's my plan. Yeah, I want to try and get you the best visuals and angles of this caliper because I've watched a number of videos where, you know, people talk about it or they try and show you it, but the camera is not quite right. So my goal is really to try and get you the angles so that you can see what I'm doing. So hopefully I achieve that. I don't know. We'll see. This is mostly prompted from me doing a restoration and rebuild on my car, some of the suspension and the knuckles and all the brakes. So I thought I would try something new. So I've never made one of these videos, but it's always good to do new things, and that's what I'm going to do. So hopefully you find this informative. Hopefully it helps you rebuild your own caliper and gives you the confidence to take this on with ease, because I really think that if you follow this from start to finish, you'll be an expert on these. So let's get started, and we'll move on to this disassembled and just in powder, and then we'll move forward to completing the full assembly where you're at the point where you can put it back on a car. All right, thanks. Let's get going. Okay, we're going to take a few minutes just to talk about finishes, as well as some of the options that you might get when you buy a remanufactured caliper. This one, as you can see, I powder coated. So if you're not really here for that, you can fast forward, but I have some interesting things to mention, so stick around if you want. If not, fast forward to the next section, and we will get into the actual assembly of the internal components and bringing this back to a fully assembled caliper. So for a few seconds, we'll say that when you buy a remanufactured caliper, often you will get them in bare iron, spray paint, oil emulsion finish, or powder coat. They all are a different price range, and it always is generally more expensive to get a coated caliper over an uncoated caliper. But the coatings are beneficial, and they will prolong the life of the caliper, especially depending on what climate you're living in. They will help with keeping the rust at bay and keeping your parts moving freely. So it is recommended, but you do you, pick whatever finish you want. But for this one, basically this one's been stripped back to the bare iron, and then it has been powder coated. So basic components: caliper body, caliper bracket. We have the lever, which attaches to the cam for the emergency brake, the return spring for that lever, and then we have the emergency brake cable arm, which attaches to the body. Okay, so from there, when I do powder on these calipers, I try and get it everywhere. I want it in all the nooks and crannies, and I will take the time to clean it out if I have excess powder. So some people really like to plug these up, tape them off, and you'll get like an uneven finish around there, or you'll see like a tape mark, which I find kind of unsightly. But doing it this way means that you're probably going to have to spend some time cleaning out the threads, cleaning out the orifices, cleaning out the seal areas, but I believe that it's worth it. So basically, as we go through, we're going to talk about chasing the threads that are on this caliper. We'll be talking about cleaning the passages that attach the caliper to the bracket. We'll be talking about cleaning out the seal areas, like I mentioned, as well as in the e-brake area and the main bore, and just getting it all prepped for your new hardware and attaching it to all of the other components that make it function. So there we go. The first thing that we're going to do after it's been freshly powder coated for me is go through all of the threads. Now, whether you've powder coated it or whether you're rebuilding an old caliper that has some miles on it, this is a good idea, because these fasteners that you're probably taking off are all corroded and the threads may or may not be very good. So going through them and tidying them up is a good idea. So the first one we're going to talk about is the banjo bolt, which is a M10 by 1.0 thread pitch. So this is a taper tap. It's the easiest one to try and feed through some of the excess powder that might be inside here. So basically you're going to take your tap. I've already done this, so this is going to go in really easy for me. But if you were doing it at the beginning, you are going to want to tap this with some cutting fluid and work it in and out a few times until you get to the point where you have fully bottomed out the tap, and then remove it, clean it all off. Often I will use WD-40 after I've finished using cutting fluid, and then blow it out with some compressed air. Do make sure you're wearing safety glasses. As the older I get, the more safe I become, I think. So make sure you're aware that you don't want to get any of these little metal chunks in your eye or any of the cutting fluid in your eye. So be safe. So that's the first one that we're going to do. As well, of note, actually, before we move forward, is you can see that I have powder all around this surface. Some people will probably have noticed that. This is the mating surface where the banjo bolt crushes two crush washers in between the brake line fitting. I've never had a problem with having the powder on here, but some people will say it is an issue. And if you do have an issue or a leak, it's really simple. Take the brake line off, clean this off with some sandpaper, put it all back together, you'll fix your problem. For me, it's worth doing. I want to try and keep the powder on this area. I want to keep it as protected as possible, so I will do that. But if you're concerned about it, take the powder off of this area and then carry on forwards. So that's that one, and now we'll move on to this one. This is for the bleeder screw, and the bleeder screw will just carry on with the top right there. That is not as important, because if you look at it closely, or if you know these seal much more like an AN fitting, which means they have two tapered surfaces that mate, and then when they come together they create a perfect seal, which means that you don't need to clean any of this area, because that's not where it's sealing internally. So don't worry about cleaning that off. You can keep it looking nice and shiny and neat. You don't need to do that. What is important though is cleaning those threads. So those threads are a M10 by 1.25. Same process. You're gonna work it in, take your time. You don't want to thread this in misaligned. In and out a few times with cutting fluid. Put it in, take it out, clean it off, put it in, take it out, clean it off, until you get it all nice and tidy. And that is that one. Then after that, we'll move on to the other two remaining ones, which are for the emergency brake cable arm mounting point. Those are a M8 by 1.0, and as well, you're gonna go like that. You thread it through. This one's easy because it's not a blind hole like the other two. Not that you're probably gonna have an issue with it, but These are both blind holes, so sometimes if it wasn't as many threads in there, you'd use a bottoming tap, which basically just has less taper at the end of it. It just allows you to bring those threads all the way to the bottom. You won't need it. A taper tap or whatever you have as a tap will work for these. You'll be fine. So just cleaning this out, making sure all of your new hardware is going to go in there and seal up nice and tight. So that is chasing the threads and cleaning them all out. After that, we're going to talk about the next area, which would be the seal areas. So in here, in the main bore, I have powder coated all the way down, basically to that last recess before you go into the piston bore. And that is because I want to get as much of that protection as I can. The goal is to make it so that you can take the piston seal and it is basically going to seat right in there, and you can see how the powder is completely around it. Now sometimes if you have too much powder in there, you may disturb the seal, but I've found with these ones it's never been a problem. They don't care about that little extra bit of powder. But ultimately that's what we want to do. We want to get that powder in there so we can protect it, so we can have the piston seal, and then on top of that we can put the dust boot, which then will have that other ring protected, and that'll keep all the moisture out of that area, which we'll talk about some of the failure points after and why we want to get that powder so deep. Because it does make a difference. I have found it makes a difference. So that is the main bore, and getting the powder in there as much as we can. The other one is going to be over at the cam sleeved area. Now in this area, there's a couple things we can talk about. One is actually going to be the sleeve. So if you've taken yours apart, you're probably going to find, if it's an OEM caliper and you're rebuilding it, you're probably going to find one of these, which is the OEM needle bearing that goes in that space right there. Now, most of the time, a remanufacturer is not going to spend the time or money on finding and sourcing one of these. These cost money, they're expensive. You can get them, you can use them, but most remanufactured ones don't have them. They are going to have an alloy sleeve that replaces that needle bearing, and it works just fine. Pretty much if you take enough of these apart, you'll find a lot of them have that in there, and it'll be perfectly fine. If you want to try and find the needle bearing, you can, but don't worry about it. It'll be fine. One of the issues is when you try to pull this needle bearing, most people are going to get defeated pretty quick because you really need a blind bearing puller. A blind bearing puller just goes into there all the way to the bottom. You thread it and expand it. It grabs the end of it, and then it's on a slide hammer, and you just pull it and extract it out of its housing. So, but just so you know, when you run into it, you're going to find that that's probably a sleeve and not a needle bearing. After that, you are going to clean out the area right here and part of that sleeve if you got anything on the sleeve, just to make sure there's no leftover powder, because you are going to fit the seal, which again, some calipers are going to not like the extra powder, that extra thickness. I have found that these Honda Acura calipers, they don't care. Seals fit perfectly. They don't leak. They go in there. So don't worry about it if you get the powder all the way in. You want the most protection. That's why I do it. So if you're going this route, don't be afraid to put some powder in there. You will appreciate the end result. So the other thing that we could talk about quickly is the areas where the caliper body attaches to the caliper bracket. I find that I will use one of these, a pipe cleaner, a metal pipe cleaner. You can get them in stainless steel, brass, nylon, all sorts of different shapes and sizes. I normally clip the end off, put it in a drill, take it, run it through here. You can clean it out several times. You'll get the powder off and you'll have a nice perfect surface where the bolt can go through, and you won't have any issues with that. As well, you can use these in the bores here and here just to clean out anything that's in there. And often, if this isn't enough, I will get a nut driver and I will attach the appropriate size socket that I need, as well as some sandpaper, tape it on there with some masking tape. You can put it in, you can work it around, clean off anything that's left over. In here, normally I'll just use my fingers and some like very fine 600 grit, 1000 grit, just to clean up those bores a little bit. We're just breaking off whatever's on the surface. We're not trying to cut into them too deeply. So that is what we're gonna do to make sure we've cleaned up all the components on this caliper. We've cleaned the threads, we've cleaned the bores, we've cleaned the slides, and we've had a good long look over it to make sure it's in good shape and all the seals will fit. Now, the final steps that I will say we'll probably do is, if you are not planning to put this together or assemble the internals right away, get some WD-40, spray the bare iron pieces with the WD-40, work it in with your finger. That's what WD is for. It's a corrosion inhibitor. It's not really a lubricant, though people use it as one all the time. Get it in there, get it on there, and you will have to take it off when we go to do the final assembly. But for now, if you're gonna put it all away on a shelf or in a box for a little bit, just make sure you put something on that board just to keep it from corroding. We will actually step back 2 seconds here to talk about just a quick side note about the failure points, because I know I kind of brought it up for a hot second there. The big failure point over here, the first one that you'll notice, is if you have a seized caliper. Often you're going to have one of the slides seized in the orifice that's on the caliper bracket. Normally, if you're actually servicing the brakes, you're going to take these apart, you're going to clean those out with some brake clean and with one of these brushes. I find them super useful. And then re-lubricate it, put the seal back in, and put it all back together. Most people are just slamming brake pads into the caliper. They're not actually taking the time to clean all of these spots, and that's what leads to the brake failure. So normally you'll get a seized sleeve. You'll get one of these that's seized up. Another one that is common is, this is a brand new piston. It's the one we're going to be putting in, but here's an old piston. And basically what happens is that over time, as this comes out, as the brake pads get thinner, you can see it's exposed to more of the elements, and you have the seal that goes right around here. Well, it works its way depending on how far it's pushed out. That will start to pit and corrode, which generally you can start getting some brake fluid weeping through the seal and out into the caliper, onto the rotor, onto the pads, and eventually getting to the spongy feeling. And this will also start to make it difficult for the e-brake to retract in and out, and ultimately cause a failure. But those are two of the most common ones. So just thought I'd mention some of those. So yeah, that's the caliper and some of the coatings you might encounter, cleaning it up, going through the threads, going through the seals, and just getting it all ready for the final assembly. So yeah, we'll move on to the next segment, which is the assembly of the caliper, which I'm sure you're all looking forward to. All right, thanks. Okay, now we're going to get into why you probably tuned in to watch this video, which is the reassembly of all the internal components back into the caliper body, making it a functional caliper again. So I figured first we'd lay out all the parts. I'd kind of put them in chronological order, and we'll go through and identify each and every piece that we're going to be touching and installing. And then we will get into depth with actually installing the parts as we move through this video. So first I will mention that if you are rebuilding one of these, you're probably going to want one of these, which is a Carlson product. That's this one. You can also get these from Honda or Acura, or there's some other brands as well. This is the little seal kit that comes with all of the wear parts that you should be replacing if you're rebuilding one of these. Just a basic rebuild. This doesn't come with a piston or anything. So let's start. First part we have here is the cam boot. The cam boot attaches to the cam. And then attaching to the cam is the cam lever. It's held in place by a lock washer and the parking nut right there. Then we'll move on to the main bore. This is what's going to go into the piston bore itself. So we're going to start with the pin. After the pin, there's going to be a replaceable O-ring, and that is going to go on the sleeve piston. It goes right there, so this O-ring should be replaced. After that, there is a cup. It's also one of the wear parts that we're going to replace, and it attaches to the adjusting bolt. You can see it right there. So you pull that one off, put the new one on. Then after that, there's a stacker of stuff that's going to go on top of that adjusting bolt. So this is identified as bearing A. It's a cup with a bunch of ball bearings in it. It's going to sit on that, and the cup is going to face up and out of the piston. Then on top of that, there is going to be a spacer. It's a metal washer, basically. After that, you are going to have the spring. The spring is going to have the large end facing out, the small end facing down. After that, you are going to have the spring cover. The wide part will be on the bottom, and that is going to be held in by the circlip, which we're going to go over doing this. This can be a little bit of a bugger, but it's not bad. Then once we have all of that assembly in the bottom of the caliper, then we are going to install the piston seal, the piston itself, and the piston boot, the dust boot. Then after that, we're going to flip the caliper around, and we're going to install some little accessories. So we'll install the bleeder screw. Then we'll install the crush washers, the banjo bolt, and then we'll put on the spring for the emergency brake lever. And then we'll attach the caliper bracket itself. But first we'll put in the boots. So you're going to put in the pin boots, and then you're going to put in pin A and pin B, and they will attach with the bolts. Then after that, you are going to put in the pad spring, and then you are going to put in the pad shims. And after that, we are going to attach the emergency brake cable arm. So those are the basic components that we're working with. There's a lot of moving parts. I will walk you through getting them all in the right position and where they're all going to go. We'll talk about them more, but that lays out what we're working with. And now we'll move on to actually installing the emergency brake cam in the caliper. But first, we are going to do this separately in the vise, which is attaching the lever to the cam itself. It's something you want to do at the beginning. You don't want to do it while it's in the caliper. It can be done while it's in the caliper, but you do risk internal damage, damaging where this pin goes. So the factory service manual recommends as well that you do this outside of the caliper. There are ways to do it inside, but let's do it outside. That's what we're going to move on to next. All right, let's put this assembly together in the way that the factory service manual describes, which is outside of the caliper as to not damage it. So we have the cam and we have the cam lever. The cam itself has a machined surface with a half moon at the top, which matches the cam lever. And there's only two ways to put this cam lever on, the right way and the wrong way. So let's save you a minute and show you the correct way. So if you lock it on like that, because it slips in, it's going to look like this, where the cam lever is pointing out, away from the caliper. This is the correct orientation. This is what you want to do. The incorrect orientation looks like this, where you have the cam lever pointing in towards the caliper. This is wrong. Don't do this. It won't work. So flip it back around, put it the correct way, which looks like this, where the cam lever is pointing out, and you'll see that the machine groove for the pin lines up with the lever pointing directly up. This is the correct orientation. This is how we're going to assemble it. We're going to put it in the vise. and we're going to put on the lock washer and the parking brake nut. And that will complete this assembly before we put it into the caliper. All right, let's put this assembly together. So we have the cam lever secured in a vise. Mine is being protected by some composite, some plastic to keep the powder from being damaged. You can put it in soft jaws, you can put it in a bare vise if you don't have any coating. Just make sure it's in there and it's secured. What you do not want to do is take the cam itself and put it in the vise and lock it in there. You will damage that surface and that is no good. So do not do that. Lock the lever into the vise. So from there, we're going to take the cam, we're going to orientate it correctly, like we already talked about. Put it in place like that. Now, hold this cam up against the lever so that it fits in that recess perfectly. You don't want to have it halfway in. You're going to take the lock washer and you're going to put that on. Now, if you want to apply a little bit of Loctite, you can. The factory service manual does recommend it. I'm not doing it for this demonstration. Then we're going to take the parking nut, holding it securely. We haven't let go, so we know it's in that groove. We're not going to twist it and damage it. Screw it on, lock it in there. Then we're going to go and get our torque wrench. We're going to set our torque wrench for 20 foot-pounds. We're going to go onto there. We're going to smoothly tighten that down in a nice sweeping motion until there we go. We got our click confirmed. It is locked down to 20 foot-pounds. It is installed correctly. It is now ready to be installed into the caliper body, which is what we're going to move on to next. Okay, let's start putting some parts inside of this caliper body. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that this body is thoroughly cleaned. We need to clean out the main bore and we need to clean out the cam bore. We should do this with brake clean and some compressed air. Make sure you're getting all that contamination or anything that's left over out of there. This is the last chance that we really have to do that. So clean it all out, and then we will move on to packing grease into the cam bearing area. The factory service manual is going to refer to it as the needle bearing, which we already talked about. We don't have the needle bearing. That is an OEM needle bearing, but most rebuilds do not have that. They have the alloy sleeve that we've already talked about. So take some silicone grease. I've already pre-packed this. Put a little silicone grease, take it, put it in the bore, work it around, make sure it's all nice and well lubricated. Put it down, and then we will get ready to put in the next part, which is the cam boot. Now, I've already put grease on this. This is one of the wear items we're replacing. Put some grease around there. Make sure it's a slippery little guy. Take it and then take it and push it into the cam body. There we go. He's in there now. So now that we have that in there and it's greased, we are going to go and grab the pin assembly that we were working on, the cam assembly. So what's really important here is that we are greasing this machined recess that the pin is going to sit in. We can put some on this outside area too. Don't worry about putting too much on here, because when you push it through that dust boot, you're going to just have it push all that grease up here. So a little bit of here, very important that you put it in there, because that grease is going to hold that emergency brake pin up vertical for us to then assemble the rest of this. So take it, flip it around, see if we can do this without it running away on us. Push it in part way, like that. So we've got it part way, and then you need to orientate that like that so that you can push it all the way through. Then when you work it back and forth, it hits a stop, sweet spot in the middle for you to put it in or off. So it's in place. We now have the cam inside the body. That's all installed. At this point, the manual would say to put on the return spring like that, but I don't do that right now because I like to have it like this with no pressure so that I can verify that the emergency brake is functioning as we install the rest of the components. So now that we've done that, it's all assembled, the cam's in place, it's all greased, it's ready to move on to the next step, which is putting components in the main bore. That's where we're going to go next. So let's move to a different position and let's secure this caliper in the vise. Okay, just before we get this thing in the vise, I thought I'd share with you all a quick trick that I have learned over the years that is going to save you from damaging any of the caliper, especially if you've invested time and money to powder coat a caliper. So most calipers, if it's bare steel, you're probably not going to care. You're probably going to grab it right on there where the arm attaches or somewhere on the body. You can use a rag, you can use soft jaws, but ultimately, if you have powder on it or spray paint, you're going to damage it. So I needed a way to find to not do that, and I have. So let me share it with you. I've never actually seen anyone else do this, but I'm sure there probably is someone. So grab a couple of bolts from your bolt bin, and you're going to install them into where that emergency brake arm attaches. I'll do it with one. You're going to install it about halfway on each side. We're going to get them in there, bottom them out against each other. Make sure they're about halfway in each. Then get two more because we don't want the caliper twisting in the vise. So we want it to have that extra point of contact. Match them so they're in about the same length. There we go. Bottom them out. Make sure they're all good. There. So now you have the 4 bolts into the caliper. We're at a point now where we don't have to even touch the caliper. That powder is perfectly protected because we are going to grab it by the bolts, and then we're going to put it in position 1, and then we're going to put it in position 2, and we can do everything we need to do without grabbing the caliper. So yeah, this is a little trick that I have learned. Share it, enjoy it. It has served me well. Let's put this thing in the vise. Okay, so now that we have the caliper in the vise using the bolts that we talked about, we're going to start putting parts into the bore. So first, we're just going to quickly look at where they're going. So this is the cam that we've already talked about, and it's way down in the bottom of the bore. And if I take this screwdriver, I can show you. If you look all the way down there, you can see that the cam is turning if we move the lever. So we're going to open it up, and we are going to install the pin, which is that little pill looking piece right there. We're going to put some grease on it. There's already grease, like we already did that in the bottom there in the cam. We're going to put a little more grease on the pin, mostly so I can attach it to the side of my screwdriver and show you where it goes. Try and do this so you can actually see. It's kind of hard. And we're going to drop it right down in there and land it. Pull it out, and then just try and line it up so it's relatively straight. There we go. Okay, and like we were talking about with leaving the spring off, I'll show you. If you put your finger down in the bottom, you feel the pin, and then you grab the e-brake lever, you should be able to push it back and forth, and you will feel it ride up and down on the cam. If it's riding up and down on the cam, you have done something right. So now that it's in there, we will just try and center it a little bit more, like that, because the next step is going to be to install the sleeve piston into the bore. So the sleeve piston, we already talked about that. It's this part. This has that O-ring that we are going to replace. So you replace the O-ring, you're going to put the silicone grease around the O-ring, around the pin there and the pin there, as well as in this cup. This cup is going to match up with the pin. Those two surfaces are going to mate, and then as you see, you have those two holes sunk into the bottom of the bore, lines up with the two pins. So getting this in the bore, I find the easiest way to do this is with a magnet Also, it'll probably help me be able to do this and you guys to see. So we're going to take the piston on the magnet. I'm going to try and do this looking through the camera, which might be challenging. Then we're going to put the screwdriver on top. We're going to turn it. Oh, there it goes. It should drop in. Once it drops in, pull the magnet out, then pull the screwdriver out. And again, to confirm it, put your finger all the way down, grab the lever, and if you look, I think we can see it moving. Yeah, you can see that is how the emergency brake functions when you pull on the lever. So it's functioning correctly, so we're going to drop it back into the bottom of the bore. Make sure it's all seated. Everything's good. Got it all in there. So now you have the sleeve piston installed, the pin is installed, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So the next step will be installing the adjusting bolt with all the parts that stack onto it. So let's move on to that. Okay, now we're going to install the adjusting bolt with all of the parts that stack onto it. So first we'll review what the adjusting bolt was. So the adjusting bolt is that part right there, and on the bottom there you can see it has the cup. Okay, so the cup is a wear part and it looks like that, and as you can see it's flat on one side and cupped on this side. The cup is going to face up out of the bore, so that goes right there facing like that with the cup facing out. So put the cup on, put some silicone grease on it on the back side and around there, and then we will start stacking some components onto here. So after you've got the adjusting bolt in your hand, you can take bearing A, which is also a cup with a bunch of ball bearings. So you're going to take it, the flat side is going to go on the back like that with the cup facing up. Okay, then after you have the cup on there, the bearing on there, then you're going to take the spacer, which is basically just a flat washer, and you're going to put that on top of that bearing. Then after you've done that, you're going to take what is called adjusting spring B. It has a small end and a large end. The small end goes on the bottom, the big end goes up. Then after you have done that, you're going to grab the spring cover, and the spring cover just sits on that like that, and that's the whole assembly. Once it's all assembled like that, we're going to take it and we are just going to drop it down in to the bore, and you can push it into place, and it's just going to sit there like that. So after we've stacked that whole assembly on the adjusting bolt, we are now going to move into compressing it and using the circlip to retain it inside the bore. So we're going to get repositioned and we will get the tool that we need to do this. Okay, we're now going to compress that assembly, compressing on top of the spring cover until we push it down into the bore past the recess that will accept the circlip. The circlip is going to lock that whole adjusting bolt assembly down in the bore, and then we will move on to the next step. To do this, generally you will need the special tool. There's a tool outlined in the manual that you can use to do this. It is easier to use it. You can also use a C-clamp. You can use a valve spring compressor. I've tried one of those before, but ultimately I have built a variation of the tool that's outlined in the manual, and I've refined it a few times to get to where it is today. And all it is a piece of flat stock with a 10M Honda bolt, and it's threaded. So I threaded it, and that works in conjunction with a deep socket that has been cut, and it has a end pivot bolt that has been welded to it. This pivot bolt is from like the early B series non-VTEC motors, and it works beautifully because that 10M bolt lines up with it. It sits in there perfectly. It keeps it aligned. It gives you a little bit of wiggle, and it also doesn't wreck the threads. So this is what I've made. You can make something more simple, or you can take some time to make something like that. If you're going to do this job more than once, I would recommend making a tool. So take the lower part of the tool, set it on top of the spring cover, then back the bolt out of the top portion of the tool so that it's sitting like that, flush. We're going to put our finger behind there. We're going to walk the top part on. Then we're going to start threading it in, and the beauty about that nut is that it self-aligns the bolt with the lower part of my tool, which means it's really easy to work it all the way down. It doesn't jump off, because if you're just got a piece of flat stock and a nut and a bolt, you are going to be jumping on and off of the socket. So then we're going to take it, compress it, try and get it back, but compress it basically until it starts to fight you a little bit. You don't want to go too hard on it, because that spring, the spring cover is not a super thick piece of metal. So then we just slide the snap ring, circlip in there. We take our snap ring pliers. You're going to want 2-inch 90-degree snap ring pliers. Take them, grab the circlip, and then compress it, slide it all the way down the bore, let it go. If it doesn't drop in right away, don't be too worried. Just take a pick or a screwdriver. There you go. I heard it click in. So, and to know that this is done correctly, if you just, I'm going to try and make it so you can see, you should be able to turn that fairly freely. And if we compress it just a little bit more, I think you can see it. Yeah. So there, now it's moving freely. So it's freely moving inside the bore. It'll only do that if it is fully open inside that groove. So once it's in there, and we're fairly confident of that, we can take it, and we can back this off. And the pressure will come off quicker when you're taking it off. You won't have to fight with it. And it should just slip out really easy. So take 2 pieces of the tool out. You can look down in the bore. You can see right there, and it's fully seated down all the way. It is compressed, and it's holding that adjusting bolt firmly in place. So now that we've completed that portion, we can move on to actually getting the piston and dust boot installed. So let's move on to that next. All right, I have repositioned the caliper in the vise to hopefully give you a better view of what we're going to do next. It's a little awkward to try and show you, but we're going to do our best. If I have to get a different angle, I will. So what we're going to do now is take and replace one of the wear parts, which is the piston seal. This you're going to apply some silicone grease to, and after you've done that, you're going to take your finger, you're going to walk it into the groove that starts just before the piston bore, work it around, making sure that it goes in flat and not twisted. After it's in, run your finger around, make sure it's all good. After you've done that, we'll move on to the part where the factory service manual would have you take the dust boot and grease this with silicone grease as well. I normally take my fingers and just run it around. That's why I'm wearing the gloves. And after it's greased, take it and put it in the top there, work it in, there you go, and put it in like that. And then you would take the piston and put the piston and drop it in and wind it in. The problem that I find is if you do enough of these, once in a while, this piston will grab the boot right there and cut it, which is no good. So I have found a better way to do this, and that's what I'm going to show you now. But before you do that, you should take some brake fluid on your finger, also why I have gloves, run it around the bore just to lubricate that seal a little bit more, as well as the internal bore. Okay, so what are we going to do? We are going to take the piston like this, the seal like this. We're going to put it on the back side. So I'll do it on the bench because it's easier. Push it over the back side so that it looks like this. And then you're going to push it up till it pops in to the groove. And then we are going to pull it back so that it tents itself like that. And then you're just going to pull it over top of that lip like that. And you're going to get the excess of that dust seal off the back like so. Now, what we're going to do now is take that, push the back in first, and then push the front in with your finger underneath the piston. And it should sit down like that. Have a good look around, make sure it's sitting completely flat. Once it's sitting completely flat, we're fairly confident that it's in place. So then you can take the factory tool, or you can take a big screwdriver. Honestly, most of the time I just use a chisel. And then we're going to wind it clockwise into the bore. It should go fairly smoothly. It's going to have a little resistance, but it should go fairly smoothly. So we're going to wind it down. Once we get close to the bottom, you can watch the seal, the top lip, go into the groove of the piston. It'll go, yep, there we go. So it's clicked in. Keep winding it down till it bottoms out. It'll keep turning. So just get to the bottom right about there. And once we do that, we'll have a visual look that the seal looks like it's fully seated. The piston is all the way down. So we're fairly confident that we know that this seal is attached at the bottom in there. But to confirm it, I have a way of doing that. All we're going to do is take a few seconds to wind this back out, doing it carefully. We don't want to go all the way, but basically watch again as that boot tents itself. There we go. So it's going to fully tent itself. Now, we know that this is properly seated because in order for it to do that and fully expand, the bottom lip of that dust boot is wedged in between the piston and the caliper body, holding it down. If it wasn't holding or properly seated, all it would do is recoil all the way up and you'd see the open void. So we know this is done correctly. So now that we know it's good, we just wind it back in place all the way down until it's fully in again. And sitting flush. And there you go. The seal is in, the piston is in, everything is good. Dust boot is fully attached. So now that we've completed that task, we will move on to the next one. Okay, so we're going to take a minute to talk about the caliper bracket. So we're going to assemble the caliper bracket, then we'll bring it together with the caliper body to complete the caliper assembly. So with the caliper bracket, we have a couple basic components. We have 2 pins, 2 pin boots, and I've included the pad retainers. So something we've already talked about is the cleaning out of this bore. So we're going to make sure that that bore is good and clean. All the old grease, debris, anything that's in there, gone. I normally use one of these metal pipe cleaners, cut it off, put it in a drill, run it in and out a couple times, and then hit it with some brake clean and some compressed air just to get it all cleaned out. After it's all cleaned out, we're going to take grease, put grease on the pin, put grease in there, and then we will install the pin boot. I'm not going to put the grease on now, it'll make a mess. So with the pin boot, you can see there are 2 very definitive sides. One that has the larger groove, one that has a smaller one. We're going to take that larger grooved one and we're going to put it inside the caliper body. So it might fight you a little bit, but just work it around until you get it all the way in there. Sometimes I find it helps to use the pin just to run it in to seat it. After you've done that, you can continue to turn this. Sometimes it helps to equalize the pressure that's trapped in there until it pops in. After it pops in, you're going to see that the boot expands without pulling out. It should turn freely and it should move in and out on both sides. So there, you've installed the pin boots and the pins. After that, I have the pad retaining clips, so we'll pop them in. If you've done pads before, these are pretty straightforward. They go on each side like that. They just click in there. And then the other one just clicks in there. I've got them both in, so there we go. We have the caliper bracket, we have the 2 pins, we have the 2 pin boots, we have the 2 pad retaining clips, and we have the completed caliper bracket. So now we're going to take this caliper bracket and we're going to add it to our caliper body to complete the assembly. Okay, we've flipped the caliper around and we've put it into the second position, anchored it in the vise. So now we're going to bring the caliper bracket that we've just finished, attach it to the caliper body, and complete the caliper assembly. After that, we'll attach a few of the accessories and we'll have the completed caliper. So the first thing that we're going to put in, we're going to take the pad spring and we're just going to put it up like that. I normally take a flathead screwdriver, put a little pressure up against it, pop it in, then bring it back to the middle. So after the pad spring is in, we'll be good to attach the actual caliper bracket. So we're going to take the caliper bracket that we just assembled, a new flange bolt, put it in place, run it in. Should go nice and easy. All this new hardware makes everything really good. It should swing freely. Bring it up, put the second flange bolt in. So if this was going on the vehicle at this point, we would torque these and they would be torqued to 17 foot-pounds, but we're not going to do that right now. So just get them in, put it together. There we go. Excellent. So now we have the caliper bracket attached to the caliper body. We're going to add a couple of the accessories. So we have a brand new banjo bolt, 2 new crush washers, used new crush washers. We're just going to drop it in there for now. We're not attaching it to the car. Make sure these are both blown out with some compressed air. Make sure there's no contamination in there. And then you can just thread this in for now to keep it protected from the elements. So thread it in, just leave it like that. If you were going to torque that, that would be torqued to 25 foot-pounds just to crush those washers. The next item is the bleeder screw. It goes right there. Again, make sure it's cleaned out. Thread it in. And if you were going to torque this, you would go to 6.5 foot-pounds. I try not to torque these. I just do it by hand with a little wrench, just so that you don't strip it out. And then the last port that we're going to put on is the lever spring that goes right here. But why we left it off is because if you take your thumb, put it up against the piston, put your hand on the lever, and if you push, you can see that the e-brake is making that piston move in and out. So it's functioning properly. That was the last check we want to do before we put it together. And if it has the spring on it, it makes it a little more difficult. So take the spring, the flat portion of the spring is going to go on the bottom up against the stop. So put it over the parking nut, push the nut in, get it set up, and then normally what I will do is hold it there, grab a screwdriver, just a small one, and we're going to walk that spring over and in, just like that. Then push it together. It's all together. You can push down on it now. Yeah, see, it's a lot more difficult to push on now. Okay, so there we go. We have it fully assembled back together. There's only one piece missing, and to put that on, we're going to take it out of the vise, flip it over, take those 4 bolts out, and attach that parking brake arm. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, we've moved the caliper out of position number 2 and placed it back on the bench. What we're going to do now is remove those 4 very useful bolts that have served us well. We're going to take them out of the caliper. get them out, put them off to the side, get the other two, and then we're going to grab the last piece that's going on here, which is the parking brake arm. It is going to go right there. We're going to take the hardware and we're going to attach the arm to the body. So get that in, get the other one in. I'm just going to do it down finger tight for now. But if you were going to torque these, they would be torqued to 17 foot-pounds. So torque those 2 bolts to 17 foot-pounds, and the arm is now fixed to the caliper body. And after that, we have a fully assembled rear caliper that has been cleaned, refinished, and rebuilt. All right, congratulations. We have made it to the end. And if you have made it this far, you deserve an award. Hopefully you've had a snack, maybe a drink to tie you over. But in all seriousness, I hope you have found this informative and educational. I hope that you now know what all the parts and pieces are, how they all work together, how they go together, and how to make this process as easy as possible. We've talked about some of the hang-ups, we've talked about some of the ways to overcome those challenges, and we've talked about how to put this back together in such a way that you can put it on a car and know with all confidence that it is going to work safely for years to come. So thank you. I have followed the factory service manual for most of the procedures. I've only deviated a couple times because over the years I've learned how to do it what I think is better. But for the most part, you should be following the factory manual procedure. If you don't have one, you can often print a page off. But I am going to make those available in this video as still pictures. So, thank you so much for spending your time with me. All the best, and keep those classic Hondas rolling.